Windows Virtual Desktop with Joseph Landis and Amol Dalvi.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. And I'm excited that lots of people are taking me up for the offer of a complimentary 30-point DevOps inspection in your environment. It's helping a lot of people. Until it's inspected, you never know what the gaps are. So if you're tuning into the podcast for the first time, the Azure DevOps Podcast is for developers shipping software with Microsoft technologies. And my goal is for all development teams to be able to move fast, deliver quality, and run their systems with confidence. And so today on the show, I have two gentlemen from a company called Nerdio. Joseph Landis is the Chief Revenue Officer, and Amol Dalvi is the VP of Product. And they do a lot with Azure, and they've implemented Windows Virtual Desktop and do some services around there, and it has a really interesting, some interesting learnings for how to use that capability of Azure for standardized development desktops, and we'll be diving into that today. But Joseph and Amol, welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Good to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Joseph, we'll start with you, just for people who haven't seen any of your content or your videos. Share a little bit about your background and kind of what led up to kind of doing work in this field.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for having us on the show. It's great to be here. So I actually worked at Microsoft for 23 years and in various sales and marketing and field-based roles. And the last 8 years of my time at Microsoft, I was pretty deep into the Azure ecosystem. And as I was working on Azure, I really learned that there was a great opportunity out in the market to really popularize virtual desktops and to really bring more partners and customers into Azure through helping them provision virtual desktops. And when I met the CEO and founder of Nerdio, Vadim Vladimirsky, and I saw the technology that we have, it was certainly a little bit of a tough decision to leave the place that I knew for 23 years. But I was so excited by what Nerdio was doing that I decided to leave and partner up with Vadim and Amol to drive Nerdio forward. And it's been a great ride the past year and a half. Awesome.
And Amol, what's your background?
Yeah, thanks for having us, Jeffrey. So my background is I am a developer. I started my career way back when as a custom software developer. And over the years, sort of have moved more into the product management track. And now my role at Nerdio is I'm the VP of product. But I've been working with developers and I've been working with SaaS software in particular pretty much all my career. Previous to working at Nerdio, I was the VP of product at a marketing automation software company. And prior to that, I ran software development for a company called ExactTarget, which later on, of course, became Salesforce Marketing Cloud. So I've had this wonderful opportunity to sort of be at that forefront of SaaS development from the very beginning and be part of what we used to call many other names before, but now DevOps is such an integral part of development that I sort of love working with developers on that aspect.
Yeah, and you have a pretty sizable development team that you run at the moment. Where are they located? Distributed or all together?
Yep. No, we've got some 30-some developers, spread out in 3 different countries, 5 different cities across those 3 countries. So it's very much a distributed team. And more recently, I have purposely taken these decisions to try and have a 24/7 cycle, just because our customer base is all over the world and I need to react to customer requests and customer issues pretty much 24/7. So I've got these developers, QA engineers, DevOps team members, pretty much spread out all across the globe.
And as I understand it, you make heavy use of Windows Virtual Desktop for developer workstations. Is that right?
We do, yeah. Not just developer, but pretty much everybody on my team is using Windows Virtual Desktop. So just to kind of give you the long answer there, my team has two sub teams, if you will. I've got a product side and I've got a engineering side. On the product side, I've got a product manager helping me, a UX UI designer on my team. And then, of course, on the engineering side, as you can imagine, I've got developers, I've got QA team members, I've got a DevOps team, and I've got what I like to call a dev support team. This is kind of sort of a rapid response team, different from the developers, but these are very much developers that are quickly responding to customer issues. So I've got these 4 different teams, and all of them are pretty much using Windows Virtual Desktop, not just developers.
And I think anybody who's done development knows all the software that you got to install, and it can take a long time to get it all going. And Azure has come out with a new revamped service, but with the iterations in the past, the new version of Windows Virtual Desktop is pretty new, and not many people know a lot about it. But can you back up a little bit and give us the whole what the heck is Windows Virtual Desktop in Azure?
Sure. So the Windows Virtual Desktop, right? So as the name suggests, you are literally running virtual desktops, Windows specifically, in Azure. And this is something that Microsoft has been attempting or has been providing in some form for many, many years. So going back 10, 15, even 20 years, RDS, Remote Desktop Services, is something we all as engineers have used to remote into servers. But that same sort of technology has been used to deploy desktops as well. So you can use not Windows Virtual Desktop, you can use RDS technology to allow end users to remote into a server, but give them a full Windows experience, an end user Windows 10 experience, or way back then it was Windows 7 or Windows 8. But you could give the regular users a Windows 10 experience using Windows Server 2016 using RDS technology. That's where traditionally Microsoft has been. And then along with that, you had Citrix and VMware sort of coming in and giving you that same experience using their own technology. Over the last few years, we have seen Microsoft sort of understand the importance of virtual desktops, and we saw them build out a lot more functionality, a lot more technology around the virtualization of desktops. Specifically, they were calling it RDMI for a while, and we were part of that sort of private preview program, the public preview program. And then just over the last couple of years, especially, I noticed a lot of activity from Microsoft and a lot of interest from Microsoft, where they actually acquired FS Logics, which is a company that is very popular in the virtualization world, and it is used for providing user profiles for users that log into virtual desktops. So they acquired FS Logics, they completely rebranded RDMI, and they started calling it WVD and got really serious about it. And what was it, Joseph? About a year ago, they sort of released Windows Virtual Desktop public preview, and then very quickly after that went GA with Windows Virtual Desktop. So it's essentially a virtualization technology from Microsoft, specifically meant for Azure. And along with that, what Microsoft did was they allowed you to now run Windows 10 multi-session in Azure. It's something that's unique to Azure. It's not something that's available in AWS or some of the other public clouds, but you can now run Windows 10 multi-session desktops in Azure using Windows Virtual Desktop.
Okay, so how is this different from the old terminal server to allow multiple people to have a remote desktop session?
Yeah, it's different in the sense that the technology is of course newer. It's much more reliable, much more scalable, but it has been specifically been built for Azure. So that I think is kind of the uniqueness to it, is that it works really well with Azure. And then sort of along with that, sort of to emphasize that point, what they did was they took some of that control plane infrastructure and turned it into a PaaS service. So some of you might be familiar, there are certain RD, remote desktop roles that you had to install to enable virtualization of desktop. Now some of those roles have gone away and they are run as a PaaS service inside of Microsoft Azure itself. So that takes some of that responsibility off the IT provider's shoulders, and they don't have to maintain the infrastructure and keep that infrastructure running. Instead, it's a PaaS service. Microsoft is responsible for providing the uptime. The costs to the provider, the IT providers significantly go down because they don't have to run those VMs anymore in the Azure environment. And it just makes it sort of a whole solution. So it makes it a solution from Microsoft as opposed to an IT provider trying to pull certain pieces together and providing that solution.
Okay. So if I've got my team of developers, I think we're all used to just remote desktoping into a VM and then using it as such. But then, of course, the VM needs to be attached to our Azure Active Directory so that we can use our Microsoft work accounts. So let's throw a scenario in there. If I'm on a development team, a really small development team, four developers, and we want to have our own Visual Studio image and just all use the same thing and then log in. How do we get started? Can I just open up my portal, Azure portal right now and create it myself?
Yeah, you could. So Microsoft has made several Azure PowerShells and APIs available where you could set that up all by yourself. But you could use a solution like ours, Nerdio, where we have made it really easy for you to stand up something like that, right? So the challenge is that if you have to learn this whole WVD technology and the PowerShell and the APIs that come along with that, what we have noticed, it takes a good 2 or 3 weeks for somebody to go through that learning curve. And then even then, when they have it all set up, they don't necessarily have the best practices in place. And then beyond that, it's kind of maintaining through PowerShell or running commands is not an easy thing to do, especially when you have very large teams of developers.
All right. Well, let's say we only have 2 to 4 developers. So I don't have a really large team. Is it even possible to use without a third-party solution?
It is, but it is rather difficult. You're going to get into issues or challenges around keeping your image up to date. What happens when Windows updates are rolled out every Tuesday? Are you making sure those latest updates are applied? What happens when one person decides to start watching YouTube and consume all the bandwidth? And how are you going to reset that user's desktop, for example? So just from a management and maintenance perspective, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. Sure, you could do it. Developers, we always find a way around things. But if you're using a third-party tool, will definitely make your life a lot easier.
Okay, so does Microsoft only market this for teams of a certain size? Then is it really not worth using for smaller teams, or does it have some use for small teams?
Sure. No, I think it can be used for small teams as well. You can actually get the advantage of being able to run one VM and able to sort of share that CPU across multiple users, right? So Microsoft has this nomenclature, they recommend, I forget the exact names now, but I know you can have knowledge workers and power users and professional workers, and they recommend what that CPU to user core ratio is. So if you want to have a dedicated VM desktop, you could do that. You could have 1 user to 1 CPU core ratio. Or if you have at the other extreme simple task workers, then you could have a 1 CPU to 6 user CPU ratio, right? So you could sort of go anywhere between that from 1:1 to 1:6, and then you could take advantage of of sharing those CPU slices. And then along with that, with Azure, you're only paying for VMs when they're actually running. So if you have developers that are, of course, going to sleep, or sometimes developers don't sleep, we just work through it with some coffee and some Mountain Dew. But when you do sleep, you can shut down those VMs and you are able to save on Azure costs by shutting down those VMs.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
Hey, this is Jeffrey. Do you ever wonder if your software project is on the right path? It's really common for software projects to experience delays, to have the quality not where it needs to be, or have the team spending more time maintaining the software than you really should. In my practice, we know the challenges implementing all parts of DevOps, and it can make your head spin how many things you have to think about, and somewhere in your gut, you know that something's missing. So I've created a comprehensive 30-point DevOps inspection, reviewing your current process, methods, tools, source control, build integration, the various levels of testing, provisioning and maintaining environments, deploying, logging, telemetry, everything you need to think about in a high throughput, high productivity DevOps environment. And it really helps you gain peace of mind knowing that you're on the right track. And we are offering some more of our really popular 30-point DevOps inspections, and it's normally a $5,000 value, but I'm giving it away for free for my podcast listeners. Just send me an email, jeffrey@clear-measure.com. That's Jeffrey. And I'd be happy to inspect your existing DevOps environment, whether you use Azure DevOps Services, Octopus Deploy, TeamCity, any number of tools, because there are a lot out there. But what's important is that you have a complete and automated DevOps environment put together the right way. So get a second pair of eyes. Send me an email. So in order to use Windows Virtual Desktop without a third-party solution, it sounds like it's not going to be really easy to auto shut down and auto scale. But if you don't care about that, you just kind of leave it running, or maybe manually shut it down at night.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Before you fall asleep at your keyboard, make sure to shut it down manually, or use a third-party tool like ours to make sure it shuts down automatically.
Okay. So when configuring the image, what's the process to actually to set up Windows the way it needs to be?
Yeah, so that's definitely a challenge that tools like ours solve. But the image is sort of the golden image for any hosts that are created in a host pool. And so I just threw out a bunch of words here, but inside of Windows Virtual Desktop, when you are running your desktop, those desktops are essentially served up by VMs. Those VMs are called hosts, and those hosts are all running inside a host pool. These host pools have certain properties that you can set. And these host pools, when it's time to spin up a host in the host pool, they need a certain golden image to create that host from. So maintaining that life cycle of that golden image is quite important. You need to make sure, like I was saying, you need to apply Windows updates, or you might have to apply Visual Studio updates. You might have to install a new application on there. So keeping that image up to date is important. And then once that image has been updated, you need an easy way to apply those updates to any existing hosts that you already have in the host pool, or any new hosts that are going to be created in that host pool need to be spun up from that golden image. So that whole lifecycle management of a golden image is not an easy thing to do. And again, I would certainly suggest looking at third-party tools for something like that.
So you run your whole team like this, and it sounds like it's a solution that's really geared towards very large groups, and that smaller teams, if they're not able to easily use it without a third-party solution, it may not be worth the time investment at this point. Is that your assessment?
I'd say, if you have a handful of developers, it may not be as much effective. But once you start getting beyond the handful of developers, you should definitely look into something like this. Tools like ours are not cheap, but they're not expensive either. It adds a few dollars every month for every user, and it's not terribly expensive. So it's definitely worth the investment. You make the return on that investment pretty quick, and especially as you have a growing team or you have a distributed team, then you will definitely reap the benefits of something like this.
All right, so you've got developers that are using it. How many VMs do developers share? Is it two developers per VM? 4? What's your ratio that you found works well for you?
Yeah. So it's less about the VMs and it's more about the CPU cores in a VM, right? So I've generally found that it's the 1:3 ratio is working out pretty well for me. We tried 1:4 ratio for a while, but then we had some performance issues. So we have now switched to using more like a 1:3 ratio. So that generally works out well for me, so on the development side, that's the ratio. And then I've got my QA engineers that are more like task workers, they don't need beefy machines. So I've stayed with more like a 1:6 ratio for my QA engineers.
Is that one core?
Yep. One core for 3 users or one core for 6 users.
Interesting. Okay, so you have 3 developers who all split one CPU core.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of time what we are doing is that you're working on your computer and you're just sort of building the code out. And then a lot of time you're just typing the code and you're just interacting with the machine. You're not necessarily using it for a lot of heavy purposes. So again, it's up to you to sort of figure out what works best for you. The other thing I'll mention is that keep an eye on latency and geo proximity, right? So that's one of the things that we had to adjust, was to make sure that the VMs are running in close proximity to the engineers. So depending upon where they were located around the world, we stood up these host pools in the region that is closest to them.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about RAM? How much RAM do you try to allocate?
That's a good question. I've tried to max out on the RAM for each developer as much I can. So generally, that's a great point to bring up. Initially we looked at using the D series in Azure, but then we very quickly switched over to the more memory intensive E series in Azure. So we've generally tried to allot at least 8, maybe even 16 gigs of memory per user. So that's definitely a big one. And then the other factor I'll point out is, keep in mind that especially if you have a distributed team, you will have developers sort of working around the cycle. So you could sort of reuse some of those resources, right? So you could leave your host pool running. You could have slightly smaller size VMs, but your developers, they may not have overlapping work hours. So you could, when one developer goes to bed, the next one comes in and starts using the VM's resources.
Gotcha. And I'm guessing at this point, premium solid state is, I guess, the commodity, the expected at this point.
Yep, absolutely. Premium SSD disks, standard SSD disks at the very least. For my QA engineers, the standard SSD disk works, but for my developers, the premium SSD disks.
Okay. Now, what's the experience like on their desk? I mean, imagine trying to paint this mental picture. I'm a developer at a desk. How many monitors do I have in front of me? What kind of computer acts as my terminal?
Yeah, so that's the nice thing about this, is that I let the developer pick whatever machine they want. Some of them have their favorites. They might have one that they already want to bring to the office. I have some people like Mac, some people like their PCs. So they bring their device. The end device is up to them to select. They connect to the Nerdio desktop using the WVD client. And once logged in, they can, we all have two external monitors and then the monitor of the laptop itself. So you typically have three monitors in front of you. The other thing is that we enforce multi-factor authentication. So when somebody logs into the Nerdio desktop, they have to go through that second factor. So there's a level of security control there. But yeah, and then you can use an external keyboard and monitor, and it's like you're just working at your desk, just like any other desktop.
Okay. So is it literally the Windows Remote Desktop client that is being opened across all three of the monitors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you just launch it from your one monitor, and then it knows you have multiple monitors connected, and then it just uses all three monitors.
Okay. So it really is RDS on the client side.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
And okay, so the management then is all on the server side and the host image.
Correct. It's only simply streaming the display down to the user's machine.
Gotcha. Okay, so then since your iPad and Android, those have RDS clients available to them, does this kind of work seamlessly? If you need to access your virtual workstation,
yes,
you do it from anywhere that has RDS support?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yep, you can use it from your iPads, any end device that allows you to run a WVD RDS client. You can do that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about certain, even apart from the developer scenario, there's desktop software that's pretty popular, like QuickBooks desktop is still really popular, and there's some big Microsoft Access programs that just they have to be installed on Windows, and it's got to be a good use case for those too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, beyond the developer use case, the QuickBooks use case is a very popular one that we see, especially with tax season and things like that. When the CPAs, they ramp up the number of part-time bookkeepers that they have. So in that scenario, having these virtual desktops for these temporary workers that they have makes a lot of sense from a security perspective. Yeah.
Okay. And so you had mentioned your developers bring whatever computer they want. You mentioned some bring MacBook Pro laptops. Those are not cheap. So are those computers just used as terminal, or is your development distributed between the virtual desktop and the actual host computer?
No, it's the development is purely on the virtual desktop. This is a developer, they just prefer to work with Macs for whatever reason. It's just their personal preference. Some people like their PCs, some people like their Macs. We have even looked at maybe using some Chromebooks for some of our developers. So rather than buying a PC or a Mac, we have looked at doing Chromebooks. But generally, I've found developers don't like Chromebooks. Some of the other folks in our organization were open to it, but developers want these faster machines and more beefier machines, typically even for their own personal use.
Okay, so are the computers that your developers used, are they their own personal, like bring your own device computers?
Yes, they are. So I'd say about, not all of them, I'd say about, let me think, about 50% of my developers sort of did the BYOD, they brought their own device. And then some of them said, yeah, I have one, but I would just prefer you buy me one. So we have a company policy where we buy certain devices for our employees, and they just bought a device from that policy.
Yeah, I'm thinking about elementary schools where sometimes you want to have a curated environment for the students, but at the same time, you don't want the devices to be very costly, because what if they spill something on them or break them? It's almost like the terminal device. You want it to be easily replaceable, but be able to log into a standardized environment.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, again, Chromebooks is another great example of something like that in that kind of a use case. The education sector, especially where you have to turn in those devices after so many years, as kids move through elementary school, middle school, or even high school, They are going to sort of move from one school to the next, and they're going to turn in those devices. So it's much easier to sort of replace those devices should something be broken or something needs to be fixed. The whole idea here is that use lightweight, cheaper end user devices and have your desktop running in the cloud so that you can control the security, you can control what's installed, you can blow things away very quickly, and you can update that desktop very easily as well.
Okay. Now, anybody who's listened this far is probably asking the golden question: how much does Microsoft charge for Windows Virtual Desktop? Do you, without saying it depends, do you have a general sense?
Yeah. So when Microsoft rolled out WVD, the other nice thing they did was, for the price of buying an Office 365 E3 license, you can also get WVD. So they rolled out what's called a Microsoft 365 Business, and that includes Office 365 and it includes a license of Windows 10 multi-session. So if you're already paying for Office 365, you're essentially getting Windows 10 multi-session for free, and you're getting WVD for free. All then at that point you're paying for is, of course, the VMs that you're running in Azure, and that's just metered by the hour, and you pay for that every month.
Now, is that up to a certain number of users, or is that for every 365 user you have?
So the Microsoft 365 license is for up to 300 users. And then the VMs that you pay for just depends on what your configuration is. Right? You could, for example, if you were doing that 1:3 ratio, you could have a B3 machine that's a 12-core machine, or you could have several 4-core machines, depending upon how you set things up.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I know a lot of people do have those Microsoft 365 licenses, more and more people. And so then really to estimate the cost is just figuring out what VM to select. Do you recall off the top of your head what VM code you've landed on for your developers?
So I typically use the E4. I forget, I think that's a 16, I forget what the configuration is off the top of my head, but I know the E series is what we landed on specifically. And I think the E4 is the VM, the host that we have. So along with that, I'll just mention one more thing. One of the things that we have in our product is this ability to automatically scale the host pool, right? So depending upon how many developers are logging into the host pool, the system can automatically add more hosts into the host pool. And then when developers log out and stop using the virtual machines, the system will automatically remove those hosts from the host pool, which is why I was able to sort of go with a smaller sized VM, because I knew that the system will automatically add more VMs when I need them to, as opposed to, if you're sort of stuck with doing some of this manually, you'd probably want to scale up and, size the VM up as much as possible at the very beginning. But with the solution that I have with Nerdio, you're able to sort of scale out and scale in as opposed to scale up and scale down. So that allowed me to have an E4 sized VM because I knew that more will be added in as developers log in.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So just for reference, the E series has 2 virtual CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM. And it looks like it's in the virtual machine pricing 0.016 cents per hour or 1.6 cents per hour, it looks like. Anyway, the Azure calculator is your friend on that. So, well, that's some great information, Amol and Joseph, on how you guys use Windows Virtual Desktop and kind of your advice and your experience with it. Joseph, if people are looking to learn more about Windows Virtual Desktop and think about kind of putting it in place for their organization, are there any go-to resources that you'd recommend that they dive into?
Yeah, there's a ton. You could go to our website on getnerdio.com, and we've got a complete set of resources, regardless of what kind of customer you are. If you want to learn more about Nerdio Manager for Windows Virtual Desktop, you can get information up there. If you'd like to take the product for a spin, it's available on the Azure Marketplace. So we look forward to welcoming you to our product.
Amol, are there any go-to resources that come to your mind?
Yeah, I'll mention that we have an Azure calculator as well. So the calculator you see on the Azure website is sort of meant for many different use cases, right? We sort of realize that when people are looking to set up a WVD-based desktop, that Azure calculator is far too generic and doesn't really address all the questions that people have. So we have created our own cost estimator, and you'll find it on our website. It's available to you for free, but it gives you a much better idea for what it would take to stand up an IT environment in Azure using WVD specifically if you want to do any development or any other use cases similar to that.
Gotcha. And it sounds like if anybody's doing some QuickBooks desktop hosting, that could be a decent scenario too.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.